While writing these letters, I was surprised by the title Monsieur given to me in one of them, as Count de Montsalon, who had drawn them up, knew very well that the Emperor honored me with the title of Count through the disposition of his will, because he had talked to me about it himself before the Emperor had. At this final moment, when death was on the verge of taking away everything that was great and eminently kind toward me, vanity could not take possession of my soul. When he returned, I handed Count de Montsalon the 2 letters he had given me to copy without comment, except that I had dated them April 25th as they were, although it was the 29th. If I am dwelling on these 2 letters, it is because Count de Montsalon, in the 2 volumes he published on St. Helena, where his memory is often at fault, says that the 2 letters were dictated to me by the Emperor, which is not the case. These letters were the work of Count de Montsalon. The word Monsieur, either in the will or the codicils, does not precede my name. And that is so true that the 8th codicil, which is later than the Emperor's letters, say, I name as my executors Messieurs Bertrand, Montsalon, and Marchand, and Las Casas, or his son, as my treasurer. When that book appeared, I complained about several errors, and in particular this one. Count de Montsalon replied that as those letters were in my handwriting, he had believed they had been dictated to me by the Emperor. In the afternoon, the doctors came, accompanied by the Grand Marshal. The Emperor talked to these gentlemen about his insomnia, which he said had been put to good advantage by dictating to each of us for 2 hours. I felt so strong, he said, looking at Dr. Arnott. Why am I no longer? I'm exhausted. The doctor, to whom these words were translated by the Grand Marshal, replied that it was the result of the overexertion of 4 hours' work. That same evening, the Emperor talked a great deal, and his speech seemed to me somewhat difficult at times. Between 8 and 9 p.m., concerned with the dispositions of his will that had occupied his morning and full of tender solicitude for his son, although Dr. Entomarchi and I were close to his bed without any light, he told me to get some paper in order to write. I replied that I had some without actually having any, believing that his mind was not quite there. However, after some time went by, he asked me again if I had paper. I replied that I did, and grabbed a playing card and a pencil that were at hand. He dictated to me the following lines that I have kept written on that same playing card. I bequeath to my son my house in Ajaccio and its dependent buildings, 2 houses with gardens near the salt works, all my property in the territory of Ajaccio, which should yield him an income of 50,000 pounds. I bequeath to my son. He stopped there and said to me, I'm very tired. We shall continue tomorrow. Along with his memory, the life of this great man dwindled every day. I had heard of the Emperor's properties in Corsica, and never had they been evaluated at such a sum. That evening's delirium recurred until May 5th, the day when so much genius disappeared from the earth. The following day, the 30th, there was talk of placing a vescatory on his stomach because the cautery I bandaged every day since the Emperor kept to his room was no longer producing anything, and the flesh was quite purple. Dr. Entomarchi had his bed brought into the library to be nearby to care for the illustrious patient. During the day, the latter instructed him when the time came to make a careful examination of his stomach in order to save his son from a disease that had led his own father and himself into the grave. Count de Montsalon, who had remained with the Emperor part of the day, distracting him with conversation, retired when Count Bertrand and the doctors arrived. The Emperor was withdrawn, little inclined to talk, and did not join in the conversation as he usually did. These gentlemen withdrew, leaving the Grand Marshal alone with the Emperor, whose eyes remained closed. On opening them, he spotted Count Bertrand and spoke a few words to him. Among them, You are sad, Bertrand. What's the matter? The Grand Marshal replied with one of those looks that revealed how much his heart was moved and saddened. I retired so as not to disturb him in what he had to say to the Emperor, who at the time was asking him for news of the Countess. That lady had remained without seeing His Majesty until then. She had talked to me about it, and I therefore knew how distressed she was. The Grand Marshal suffered greatly himself. He no doubt talked to the Emperor about it. As when he came out, he told me with a cry of satisfaction the Emperor had told him to bring his wife and children. During the evening, he learned that Pierron had gone into town. He summoned him and asked if he had found some good oranges, and if they came from the Cape or from Rio de Janeiro. He also asked him if people in town were talking about his illness, and Pierrot replied he was the first one who had mentioned it in the shops he'd visited. What, he said, they don't know in town that I'm ill? Hudson Lowe and Baxter are hiding this from the inhabitants? Then, dismissing him a few moments later, he said to them, "That is fine. You have pleased me. I want you to be happy after my death." During the day, the emperor's eyes often focused on the small oil portrait of the King of Rome. During the night, he had the hiccups. The 1st of May at 11 a.m., Countess Bertrand was shown in to the emperor's bedside. After having her sit down and asking how she was, he said to her, "Well, madame, you two have been ill. You are now well. Your illness was known. One, mine is not, and I am dying. How are your children? You should have brought Hortense to me." "Sire," replied the countess, "they are all well. Your majesty has accustomed them to so much kindness that they feel a great privation not seeing you anymore, and they came with me every day to inquire about your majesty's health." "I know it, Marchand told me. Thank you." The emperor talked to her a few minutes more and told her to come back and see him. Countess Bertrand retired so as not to further tire the emperor. Her emotion was then fully revealed, her eyes filled with tears. I accompanied her out to the garden, and she said to me, "What a change has occurred in the emperor since the last time I saw him. Those emaciated features, that long beard hurt me to see. The emperor was very cruel in refusing to receive me. I am very pleased for this return of friendship, but I would be even happier if he had accepted my care." After that, Countess Bertrand came every day to spend a few moments by the emperor's bedside, and he continued to be kind to her. The emperor's speech had become much shorter these last 2 days, and Doctors Arnault and Antomarchi were sleeping in the library. Count de Montsalon and Count Bertrand remained alternately in the emperor's bedroom. The second was quieter. The emperor often cast his eyes on the portrait of his son. He accepted the care of his generals alternately and often dozed. Having remained until midnight with Bertrand, we were relieved by Count de Montsalon and Saint-Denis. I threw myself fully clothed on a mattress in the dining room. The emperor, who, in spite of his weakness, had always wanted to get up for the slightest need, wanted to get out of bed. Count de Montsalon and Saint-Denis approached. Having remained standing for an instant, his legs gave way under the weight of his body, and the emperor would have fallen if both of them had not held him up. After he was back in bed, such great weakness followed that for a moment they thought life was about to escape him. Dr. Antomarchi suddenly arrived and brought him back to life. Count and Countess Bertrand spent the entire day of the 3rd at Longwood, and even dined there. The emperor did not want anything but sugared water with a little wine. Every time I offered him some, he said, looking at me with satisfaction, "That's good, that's very good." The vesicatory he agreed to have placed on his chest produced very little results, and the cautery was completely dry and no longer needed bandaging. That same day, the governor expressed his desire that a consultation take place between Doctors Antomarchi and Arnault and Doctors Short and Mitchell. The Grand Marshal spoke of it to the emperor, presenting it as a wish of Dr. Arnault's, and he replied he saw nothing wrong with it. These gentlemen assembled in the adjoining room and deliberated in the presence of Count Bertrand and Count de Montsalon. The Grand Marshal came to report on this consultation. The outcome was that the small of his back should be rubbed with cologne mixed with plain water because it was getting sore. He should take a tranquilizing potion that was supposed to do him good. "That's fine," he said to the Grand Marshal. "We'll see." Then, when Count Bertrand was outside, he said, looking at me and making a face, "What great results from science! What a consultation! To rub the back with cologne water. Very well. As for the rest, I want no part of it." When Novarez learned of the emperor's condition and that he might die without his having seen him, he got out of bed, where he himself had been for a whole month. Pale, wasted from illness, he walked unsteadily to the emperor's bed. When the latter noticed him, he said, "You are much changed, my boy. Are you better now?" "Yes, sire. I'm very pleased to know you are out of danger. Do not tire yourself by remaining on your feet. Go get some rest." Novarez felt weak, distressed by the condition in which he had seen the emperor. He barely had time to reach the next room, where he fainted. When he recovered, he said to me, "I can't tell you what I felt when I looked at the emperor, but it seemed to me as he spoke he was drawing me to him and telling me to follow him. Abundant tears relieved his heart, so deeply moved by the spectacle he had just witnessed. That same day, around 2 o'clock, I was alone with the emperor when Saint-Denis quietly came to tell me Father Vignali wanted to talk to me. I went to see him. The emperor, he said, has asked me through Count de Montsalon to come and see him, but I need to be alone with him. The priest was in civilian clothes and held something inside his coat he was trying to hide. I did not attempt to guess at what it was, knowing that he'd come to perform a religious act. My heart tightened painfully at the thought that all hope was lost. I left Father Vignali alone with the emperor, remaining by the door to prevent anyone who came from entering. The Grand Marshal approached me and asked what the emperor was doing. I told him Father Vignali had asked me to be shown in and had requested to remain alone with him, and that I thought he was currently performing a religious act to which the emperor wanted no witnesses. I'm going to see Montsalon, he said, and inform me as soon as Vignali comes out. About a half hour later, the priest came out and said to me, the emperor has just received last rites. The condition of his stomach does not permit any other sacrament. I went back into the emperor's room and found him with his eyes closed and his arms stretched out along the edge of his bed. I knelt by his side and brought my lips to his hand without his eyes opening. Saint-Denis had done the same previously without the emperor opening his eyes then either. I remained alone, standing before the emperor's bed, holding back my sobs, but allowing my tears to flow freely. Saint-Denis came to inform me that Dr. Arnott was there. I went out to greet him, understanding my grief, which he attributed to the emperor's desperate condition. He shook my hand affectionately. Approaching the emperor's bed, I softly announced Dr. Arnott and showed only a calm face when my heart was so cruelly torn. I immediately moved aside to give free rein to my tears, which still flowed today for the man who so richly deserved our sorrow and our devotion. The Grand Marshal arrived soon afterward. The emperor talked to the doctor about the result of the consultation, which he found to be quite insignificant, and told me to give him something to drink. I remained alone with him after these gentlemen left. He did not talk to me about the religious act he had just fulfilled. As a result of this consultation, I was called on to give the emperor some calomel. I told the Grand Marshal and Count de Montsalon, who talked to me about it, that the emperor had positively told me he wanted no beverage or potion that was not approved by him, and that they should remember the emperor's anger at Dr. Antomarchi in a similar circumstance. Yes, no doubt, the Grand Marshal said to me with his usual kindness, but this is a last resource we are attempting. The emperor's lost. We must not have reason to reproach ourselves for not having done everything humanly possible to save him. Encouraged by these last words of the Grand Marshal, I diluted the powder in some water with a little sugar, and when the emperor asked me for something to drink, I presented it to him as sugared water. He opened his mouth and swallowed with difficulty, and even tried without success to spit it all out. And then turning towards me, he said in a tone of reproach so affectionate and so difficult to describe, "You too are deceiving me?" Seeing the look he gave me, and which expressed so much pain at being deceived, the Grand Marshal, who was present when he said it, was moved and said to me with deep feeling, "There is so much friendship in that reproach." It was true, and I was shattered for having just broke the promise I had made to him, not to give him anything without his permission. The emperor was certainly very ill, but he was still conscious of what he was saying, and I would have been miserable indeed if those words had been the last he spoke to me. They had hurt me so much I feared that perhaps he would no longer want to accept anything from me. Then a half hour later, he asked me for something to drink and trustingly took from me the reddened sugar water I offered him. "That's good, that's very good," he said after drinking it. I confess that only then did I feel better about what I had done, because he no longer remembered it himself. The emperor's feet were constantly wrapped in hot towels to restore warmth, and Count Bertrand and Count de Montsalon watched over him all night. The marshal's wife came for a moment to see the emperor and spent the day in the library where a table had been set up for dinner. The few French servants who did not have access to the emperor's bedroom waited anxiously for news at Saint-Denis, or I gave them when we came out. On May 4th, the emperor refused all help offered him. He continued to drink water and wine with sugar, or sugar-flavored water with orange blossoms. These were the only drinks that appeared to please him. Each time I served them to him, he answered me with these words, "That is very good, my boy." He often vomited what he took. The retching became more frequent. He made an effort to get up. Dr. Antomarchi tried to prevent him from doing so, but he pushed him away, appeared very upset by the attempt to constrain him, and demanded to be left alone. During the day, hiccups set in and lasted late into the evening. From time to time, Count de Montholon offered him something to drink. Around 10 o'clock, he seemed to be asleep under the mosquito netting that had been lowered. I remained close to his bed, watching his every move, while the two doctors, Count de Montholon and the Grand Marshal, spoke softly amongst themselves next to the fireplace. The Emperor made an effort to vomit. I immediately raised the mosquito netting to offer him a small silver basin, into which he vomited a blackish liquid, after which his head fell back onto the pillow. The hiccups had appeared at intervals, became much more frequent, and delirium set in. The Emperor pronounced a lot of inarticulate words that were translated. France, my son, the army. One can conclude with absolute certainty that his last preoccupation, his last thoughts were for France, his son, and the army. These were the last words we were to hear. This condition continued until 4 o'clock in the morning, and the vesicatories applied to his legs had no effect. At 4 a.m., calm followed his agitation. It was the calm of courage and resignation. The Emperor's eyes remained fixed and his mouth drawn. A few drops of sugar water introduced by Count de Montholon strengthened his pulse. A sigh escaped his noble chest, and hope reawakened in us. But alas, it was only the flight of his soul escaping its mortal shell to rise toward eternity.